Section 1 Introduction. In this introductory section, we focus on the capabilities of large language models, LLMs, in generating code snippets from natural language specifications, while acknowledging their limitations when faced with complex coding problems typical of competitions or professional software engineering interviews. Recent advances have looked at enhancing the performance of these models through a method called self-repair. This process allows the model to identify and correct errors in its own code. Let's take a brief look at how self-repair works. Initially, based on a given specification, the model generates a program. The program is then tested using a set of unit tests provided with the specification. If any test fails, the error message and the problematic program are passed on to a feedback generation model. This model generates a brief explanation of why the code failed. This feedback is then passed to a repair model, which attempts to fix the program. At first glance, self-repair appears to be a very promising solution. It can rectify mistakes that arise due to unlucky code generation samples, and it can effectively integrate feedback from symbolic systems like compilers, static analysis tools, and execution engines during the repair phase. It also reflects the way human software engineers typically write and debug their code, through a process of trial and error. However, an important point to remember is that the self-repair method requires more instances of model usage, which results in increased computational costs. We need to consider whether self-repair is indeed a winning strategy or if you would stand a higher chance of success by simply drawing more code samples independently and identically distributed, i.d., from the model and testing them against the provided unit tests within the same computational budget. It's essential to note that the effectiveness of self-repair doesn't just rely on the model's ability to generate code but also its capacity to identify where and how the code it produced is incorrect according to the task specifications. To our knowledge, this stage has not been extensively studied in previous or current research. In this paper, we aim to analyze the effectiveness of self-repair with GPT-3.5 and GPT-4 in resolving competition-level code generation tasks. We begin by proposing a new evaluation strategy, named PASA-T, where we compare the likelihood of generating a correct program, as determined by the given unit tests, against the total number of tokens sampled from the model. By employing this method over the traditional PAS-K metric, which considers pass rate against the number of trials, we can accurately measure the performance improvement via self-repair against any additional work performed by the model during feedback generation and repair. With this evaluation strategy, we will then scrutinize the dynamics of the self-repair process under different settings. Our primary goal is to understand how state-of-the-art code generation models can scrutinize and debug their own code. Thus, we will run a series of experiments focusing on improving the feedback stage alone. In these experiments, we will investigate the effect of using a stronger feedback generation model than the code generation model. For instance, using GPT-4 to generate feedback for GPT-3.5 code model, and compare the feedback provided by the model to feedback given by human programmers. Our experimental findings show that, 1. Taking into account the costs of inspection and repair, performance gains from self-repair are only evident with GPT-4. For GPT-3.5, the pass rate with repair is the same or lower than the pass rate using the baseline, no repair approach across all budgets. 2. Even for the GPT-4 model, performance gains are relatively modest, increasing the pass rate from 66% to 71% with a budget of 7,000 tokens, roughly equivalent to the cost of 45 i.d. GPT-4 samples, and require sufficient diversity in the initial programs. 3. Replacing GPT-3.5 feed's explanations of what is wrong with feedback produced by GPT-4 leads to better self-repair performance, even surpassing the baseline, no repair GPT-3.5 approach, increasing the pass rate from 50% to 54% at 7,000 tokens. 4. Substituting GPT-4's own explanations with those provided by a human programmer significantly improves repair, resulting in a 57% increase in the number of repaired programs which pass the tests. Section Summary. The use of self-repair in large language models, LLMs, for generating code snippets from natural language specifications has been proposed to overcome mistakes caused by unfortunate samples during decoding and to mimic the trial and error way in which human software engineers write code. However, self-repair requires more invocations of the model, thus increasing the computational cost, and its effectiveness depends not only on the model's ability to generate code but also on its ability to identify how the code is wrong with respect to the task specification. In this paper, the authors study the effectiveness of self-repair with GPT-3.5 and GPT-4 when solving competition-level code generation tasks and find that performance gains from self-repair can only be seen with GPT-4, and even then, the gains are modest at best. Section 2 Related Work. In this section, we're discussing two main themes: the use of large language models for program synthesis, and the method of repairing coding errors, often referred to as code repair. Looking into prior studies, large language models have been extensively used for program synthesis. Much of the research in this area evaluates the efficacy of these models in terms of raw accuracy or a performance measure known as pass at k. This measure relies heavily on using filtering techniques to trim down the possible answers and select the best one. Our approach, however, is slightly different. We focus on reducing the number of potential answers that the model needs to generate in the first place. Another key difference in our work is that we utilize the full set of input-output examples, a practice typically seen in inductive synthesis. We don't distinguish between public tests for filtering and private tests for confirming the correctness of the answers, because our method doesn't involve filtering the results. Now, let's talk about code repair. It's a concept with a rich history in both the programming languages and machine learning communities. Traditionally, code repair has been used mainly to fix code written by humans. But recently, it's been adopted as a step to refine automatically synthesized code, applicable to both domain-specific languages and general-purpose code. Our work stands out in this area because we're using textual feedback for repair, which is a possibility thanks to the increasing use of large language models for program synthesis. There are several contemporary studies closely related to our work that deal with self-repair of large language models. Some researchers explored self-repair using a variety of finely tuned models, focusing on the process without needing natural language feedback. They experimented with codecs, encoder, and codegen, although they didn't consider the cost implications of feedback and repair in their framework. This presents a very different viewpoint on self-repair. Some researchers assessed codex's ability to self-repair across various tasks in a framework similar to ours. Despite the similarities, our study differs in the choice of models, evaluation strategy, and most importantly, the research goal. We're specifically interested in understanding the importance of the textual feedback stage. Self-repair has also been employed in contexts outside of code generation. For example, it's used to rectify missteps and enhance factual grounding in a ChatGPT-based web search assistant, wherein the model amends its initial response based on self-generated feedback. In another framework, the model iteratively provides feedback on and refines its output until it meets a set criterion. This approach has been used for various tasks, including dialogue and code optimization. In our work, we introduce a novel evaluation metric, pass at t, to probe the significance of the textual feedback stage in competition-level self-repair. We see this as a complementary contribution to contemporary research that uses traditional metrics to assess self-repair in broader contexts. We're excited to see how our findings might be applicable in these other domains. Section summary. The use of large language models for program synthesis has been extensively studied in the literature, with a focus on evaluating models based on accuracy or pass at k metric. However, this work differs in that it evaluates models based on minimizing the number of samples drawn from the model and assumes access to the full collection of input-output examples. The contribution of this work is the use of textual feedback for repair, which is made possible by the rise in the use of LLMs for program synthesis. Section 3. Methodology. Our methodology, as depicted in the included figure, is founded on a self-repair process that can be broken down into 4 stages: generating code, executing code, generating feedback, and repairing code. Let's delve deeper into each of these steps. In the code generation phase, we start with a specific set of rules or conditions, which we'll call psi. Based on this psi, our programming model creates multiple independent and identically distributed samples of code. This process is similar to running multiple experiments under the same conditions and noting down the outcomes. Next, in the code execution phase, these code samples are run through a test environment. It's important to note that we have the full set of tests available to us in an executable form. If any code sample manages to pass all tests, we consider our task accomplished, as we've found a working program. However, if all samples fail, we gather the error messages provided by the system. These errors could either detail the issues that occurred during the compile or runtime phase, or highlight a discrepancy between the expected and actual outputs of the program. The third stage, feedback generation, is crucial. While the error messages from the system can give us some insights, they are usually too high level to aid in the repair process. So, we employ a feedback model to get a deeper understanding of what went wrong. Using this model, we generate a series of feedback strings for each failed program. This step helps us in better understanding the significance of each error. Finally, we move to the code repair stage. Using the feedback we've obtained, we sample a number of possible fixes, or repaired, programs, for each initial program that failed. It's worth noting that we use the same model for both code generation and code repair, as they share fundamental similarities. The sequence of initial programs, their associated feedback, and the subsequent repairs form what we refer to as a repair tree. It originates with the specification's SI and branches out into the various stages of our process. There's a caveat, however. Our framework does not necessitate that the programming and feedback models be the same. This opens the possibility for the use of specialized models in our system. Yet, when the programming and feedback models are identical, we generate both the feedback and the repaired program simultaneously, using a single system call. This is because the models we utilize, like GPT-3.5 and GPT-4, naturally interweave text and code in their responses. We provide a more detailed comparison of this approach and the previous setting in the appendix. Section Summary. The self-repair approach involves 4 stages: code generation, code execution, feedback generation, and code repair. The code samples generated are executed against a test bed, and if any sample passes all of the tests, a satisfying program has been found. Feedback generation produces a more detailed explanation of what went wrong, and in the final step, candidate repaired programs are sampled from the programming model. Section 3.2 Pass at T, pass rate versus token count. In this section, we're exploring a concept we call pass at T, which is essentially the success rate based on the total number of tokens we sample from our model. This comes in as a more effective metric for comparing and evaluating various hyperparameter options for self-repair, given that self-repair involves multiple model operations that don't all have the same cost. The standard pass at K metric, which calculates the likelihood of getting a correct program in K independent and identically distributed samples, isn't quite suitable here. So, let's break down how pass at T works. Suppose we have a dataset D, which is a collection of tasks, and we have specific values for our hyperparameters. From our dataset, we pick a task and generate a repair tree as per the procedure we described in Section 2. This tree has a certain number of program and feedback tokens. Our pass at T metric is then defined as the expected pass rate at the count of tokens we expect to generate given our choice of hyperparameters. In simpler terms, it measures whether we can successfully repair a program within the budget of the total number of tokens used. This is calculated for each task and an average is taken to define the overall metric. In our experiments, we create a visual representation of this by plotting bootstrapped estimates of pass rates and token counts. To achieve these estimates, we initially create a large repair tree for each task specification, based on our initial samples of program and feedback tokens, as well as repair candidates per feedback. Then, we randomly draw different repair trees from this existing dataset and compute the average pass rate and tree size. This method greatly reduces the computational effort needed for our experiments, since we can recycle the initial dataset for all hyperparameter choices. For our experiments, we set our initial program samples to 50, with self-repair approaches considering up to 25, and the no-repair approach considering up to 50. For feedback strings, we use 25, considering up to 10, with an exception in a later section where we consider only one feedback string. As for repair candidates, we keep it at 1 for most of our experiments, given that we're jointly sampling feedback and repair. Lastly, for all settings, we consider 1,000 different repair trees from our dataset. Section Summary. To evaluate hyperparameter choices for self-repair, we use the pass at T metric, which measures the pass rate as a function of the total number of tokens sampled from the model. This is because pass at K is not suitable for this setting due to the non-uniform cost of dependent model invocations. We obtain bootstrapped estimates of the pass rate and tree size by generating a large repair tree for each task specification and subsampling n_t different repair trees from this frozen dataset. Section 4 Experiments. In this section, we conduct several experiments with the primary aim of answering 3 research questions. Firstly, we aim to understand whether a process we call self-repair outperforms a technique known as independent and identically distributed (IID) sampling in complex programming challenges for the models we're investigating. If self-repair does prove superior, we're interested in identifying the specific model parameters that make it most effective. Secondly, we want to examine whether implementing a more robust feedback model might improve our model's ability to perform self-repairs. Lastly, we want to find out if involving a human in the feedback process might enhance the self-repair performance, even when using our most powerful model. We assess these hypotheses using Python programming problems taken from the apps dataset. This dataset offers a wide variety of programming challenges, each paired with a series of tests, which makes it an ideal, albeit challenging, platform for studying self-repair. To keep our experiments manageable, we focus on a selection of 300 tasks from the apps test set, These tasks are selected to reflect the range of different difficulty levels present in the test set. This means our sample includes 180 interview-level questions, 60 competition-level questions, and 60 introductory-level questions. More details on these tasks can be found in the appendix. For our experiments, we use two language models, GPT-3.5 and GPT-4, and implement the self-repair process using a method called templated string concatenation, combined with one-shot prompting. Detailed information on the prompts we use is provided in the appendix. We also compare our results with a baseline where no repair is applied. This baseline is represented by a black line in our charts and is created by simply using I.D. sampling with the corresponding model, for instance, GPT-4 when we are investigating GPT-4's self-repair capabilities. Finally, based on our initial experiments, we've chosen to set the decoding temperature for all models at 0.8. This encourages the models to generate a more diverse range of samples. Section summary. The authors conducted experiments to answer 3 research questions related to self-repair in challenging programming puzzles using GPT-3.5 and GPT-4 models. They evaluated their hypotheses on a subset of the app's dataset consisting of 300 tasks and compared their results against a baseline without repair. The authors found that self-repair was more effective than I.D. sampling without repair, and that a stronger feedback model and human feedback improved repair performance. Section 4.1 Self-repair requires strong models and diverse initial samples. In this section, we examine a scenario where a single model is responsible for generating both the code repairs and the feedback. This model setup was tested on both GPT-3.5 and GPT-4. We aim to understand if the self-repair approach leads to better results compared to a method that does not involve any repair, and instead, relies on random sampling. We varied 2 factors in our setup: the number of initial random base samples and the number of joint feedback repair samples generated by the model. These factors were tested in a range of combinations, for example, 1 initial sample and 1 feedback repair sample, or 25 initial samples and 10 feedback repair samples, and many more in between. Remember, when the same model is used for feedback generation and code repair, we sample pairs of feedback strings and repair programs jointly, not sequentially. We've presented these results in visual formats for both GPT-3.5 and GPT-4. In these diagrams, each point's color represents the number of initial samples, and its shape indicates the number of feedback repair samples. In another set of diagrams, we use a heat map representation, where the color of each cell corresponds to the mean pass rate, normalized against a baseline of the no-repair approach with the same computational budget. A normalized mean pass rate of 1 means that the self-repair and no-repair methods have the same success rate, while a value greater than 1 implies that self-repair is more effective. From these visual representations, we found that for GPT-3.5, the self-repair method did not improve results across any of the tested combinations of initial samples and feedback repair samples. This suggests that self-repair may not be an effective strategy for this model. However, for GPT-4, we observed that in several scenarios, the self-repair method outperformed the no-repair baseline. For example, with 10 initial samples and 3 feedback repair samples, the success rate increased from 65% to 70%. Similarly, with 25 initial samples and only 1 feedback repair sample, it increased from 65% to 71%. Our analysis also revealed that, with a fixed number of feedback repair samples, increasing the number of initial samples consistently improved performance for both models. Conversely, fixing the number of initial samples and increasing the number of feedback repair samples didn't seem to be cost-effective, as it provided only marginal gains at higher budgets and even reduced performance at lower budgets. This trend indicates that the success of self-repair depends more on the diversity of the initial samples than on the diversity of the repairs. More initial samples increase the chances of having a program close enough to the ideal one, which can be successfully repaired. In a subsequent experiment, we explored the effect of varying the number of initial samples, keeping the number of feedback repair samples constant at 1. This experiment confirmed our previous findings. The self-repair method was ineffective for GPT-3.5 but beneficial for GPT-4, especially with a higher number of initial samples, where it increased the success rate by over 5 points. Section summary. The effectiveness of self-repair for code generation was evaluated by varying the number of initial base samples and joint feedback repair samples drawn from the same model for GPT-3.5 and GPT-4. Results showed that self-repair was not effective for GPT-3.5, but for GPT-4, it was effective for certain values of n_p and n_fr. Increasing the number of initial programs consistently led to relative performance gains for both models, while increasing N_FR did not appear to be worth the additional cost incurred. Section 4.2 GPT-4 feedback improves GPT-3.5 repair. In the next part of our analysis, we explore how the quality of feedback can affect the self-repair process, particularly for the GPT-3.5 model. We question if GPT-3.5's self-repair struggles might be due to its own limitations in examining and rectifying its code. In our experiment, we applied GPT-3.5 as the model to generate the original content and employed GPT-4 as the feedback model, modifying certain parameters in a manner similar to our previous experiment. To explain, the parameter values of N_P, N_F, and N_R, which represent the length of the input for the production model, feedback model, and repair model respectively, are varied within a given range. This is different from our previous experiment where we only considered two parameters, namely N_P and N_F, since there was no distinction between feedback and repair stages. In order to manage our computational resources and taking into account the low variance observed in our earlier experiment, we decide to set the feedback model to generate 10 sequences instead of the previously set 25. The results from this experiment are represented in a chart, highlighted by a bright blue line. We find that when using GPT-4 for feedback, GPT-3.5's performance does improve and becomes slightly more efficient than simply generating independent and identically distributed I.D. samples from GPT-3.5. This indicates that the quality of the feedback stage is vital to the overall process, and improving this element can significantly aid in overcoming the self-repair hurdles in GPT-3.5. Section Summary. The authors conducted an experiment to test the hypothesis that self-repair is limited by the model's inability to introspect and debug its own code. They used GPT-4 as a stronger model to generate feedback for GPT-3.5 and observed that improving the textual feedback stage is crucial for GPT-3.5 self-repair and can relieve the bottleneck in its performance. Section 4.3 Human feedback significantly improves the success rate of GPT-4 repair. In this section, we delve into the impact of human feedback on the success rate of GPT-4's ability to repair programming errors. We are not focusing on a comparison between human-involved versus fully automated repair strategies, as the former places a larger cognitive load that we aren't evaluating in this study. Our primary interest is in assessing how the model's ability to identify and correct coding errors stacks up against human expertise, and what effect this has on the model's self-repair performance. Both qualitative and quantitative methods are used to examine the influence of human feedback on the self-repair process. Our method of data collection starts with selecting 20 tasks from the app's test set, leaning towards easier tasks to lessen the time burden for the study participants. For each task, 2 failing GPT-4 attempts are chosen, leading to a total of 40 programs to be refined. We brought in 16 participants, a mix of graduate students and 1 professional machine learning engineer, who were given 5 distinct programs suited to their Python and competitive programming experience. Each participant was asked to interpret, in their own words, the mistakes in the programs. To lessen the cognitive load, each program was presented along with the corresponding error message and 2 pieces of feedback from GPT-4. This feedback was procured by randomly selecting from feedback repair pairs from previous experiments and removing the code block. Importantly, to minimize variation caused by individual skill levels and writing styles, each of the 40 programs was reviewed by 2 different participants. Participants were allocated an hour to complete the study and received a 15 gift card as compensation. This data collection process was approved by our institutional review board and conducted solely through an online survey. After collecting 2 human-written feedback pieces for each program, we asked GPT-4 to generate 25 candidate repairs for each program. These repairs were influenced by the original specifications, the initial program, and feedback which could either be from GPT-4 or from a participant. Each of these candidate repairs was executed against the testbed, and the successful instances were noted. From our observations, we saw that including human feedback led to a success rate over 1.57 times higher than when GPT-4 debugged on its own. Interestingly, the difference was more pronounced as the complexity of the problems increased. This suggests that GPT-4's ability to provide accurate and useful feedback is more limited compared to human participants when the tasks and code become more intricate. In our qualitative analysis, we observed differences in the feedback provided by human participants and GPT-4. We reviewed the feedback and noted if it appeared correct, suggested small or large changes to the code, contained blocks of pseudocode or Python, or expressed uncertainty. The observations indicated that almost all human feedback was in natural language with sporadic single-statement math code expressions, and only a small fraction included pseudocode or explicit Python. Comparatively, GPT-4's feedback was much more likely to be clearly inaccurate. GPT-4 had a higher tendency to suggest minor changes, whereas humans were slightly more inclined to propose high-level changes. Humans occasionally expressed uncertainty, a trait absent in GPT-4's feedback. These results imply that the performance difference isn't due to participants providing explicit code blocks for the model to merely replicate. The improved performance seems to stem from more accurate feedback, a superior ability to suggest large-scale changes when required, and the human participants' tendency to express their uncertainty instead of confidently providing potentially inaccurate feedback. Section Summary. The study examines the impact of human feedback on self-repair using GPT-4. The results show that the overall success rate is increased by over 1.57 times when using human feedback instead of GPT-4's own debugging. The qualitative analysis reveals that human feedback is more accurate, suggests high-level changes, and expresses uncertainty, while GPT-4's feedback is more likely to be inaccurate and suggests small changes. Section 5 Limitations. Section 5 Our limitations. One of the challenges we encountered in our research is tied to the need to balance computation costs with the accuracy of our findings. To make our study more manageable, we initially generated and later sampled from sizable repair trees. While this approach aided us in managing the computational resources, it unintentionally introduced some level of bias into our results. However, we've attempted to reduce this bias by assuming a high degree of uncertainty in our pass at t measure, using the maximum standard deviation across all data points as our guide. It's worth noting that the standard deviation, which we calculated at relatively low values of the variables, n_p, n_f, n_r, where we had numerous samples in our repair trees, was found to be incredibly low, resulting in less than a 2% pass rate for all our models. Even though our efforts cannot fully eliminate bias, not using this method would have resulted in a substantial increase in the computing power needed. Our second limitation stems from the assumption that for each task, we have access to an executable suite of unit tests. In other words, we didn't require our model to extract tests from written specifications. Even though this might appear odd in a time where AI chat assistants like ChatGPT are the norm, it does align well with traditional software engineering practices, such as test-driven development. Moreover, technologies that can automatically create test cases from specifications could potentially alleviate some of the user's burden. Lastly, our study based on human data did not keep track of the amount of time participants took to debug the programs. Consequently, we are only able to assess the quality of the feedback and its effect on the repair process. To better understand how and when human intervention should be employed, as well as how to design programming assistants that foster this style of interaction, more research is required at the crossroads of human-computer interaction, HCI, artificial intelligence, AI, and program synthesis. Section Summary. The paper has two limitations. Firstly, pre-populating and subsampling from large repair trees introduces statistical bias, but this is mitigated by being generous in uncertainty and using the maximum standard deviation. Secondly, the assumption of having access to an executable suite of unit tests for each task may seem out of place in the era of chat-style assistants, but it aligns well with established software engineering practices like test-driven development. The study on human data did not track the time participants took to debug the programs, so further research is needed to explore when and how human intervention should be leveraged.